Trump's 2025 tariffs are shaking the foundations of global trade. From auto parts to steel, critical exports from long-standing allies now face tariffs of up to 50%. But while Washington doubles down on protectionism, another nation is quietly rising as the new trade favorite, Canada. Countries aren't cutting off trade, they're simply rerouting it, and Canada is becoming their safe bet. In this exclusive documentary, we reveal 7 major economies, from Mexico to Japan, who are quietly shifting their trade focus northward. These are not loud diplomatic statements. They're quiet, strategic moves to avoid US crosshairs and keep exports alive. So, what happens when the world chooses Canada over America? Number 1. Mexico. Mexico's economic fate is deeply tied to its northern neighbors. Nearly 80% of its exports go to the United States, especially in automobiles, electronics, and agriculture. In 2024 alone, the US imported over $181 billion worth of Mexican vehicles and parts, almost 10% of Mexico's GDP. But when Trump's administration imposed new tariffs of 25 to 30%, Mexico responded quickly. President Claudia Sheinbaum warned that if the tariffs held, Mexico would reach out to Canada and other partners. And within weeks, she and Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney signed a deal to strengthen trade collaboration, signaling a new strategy. Mexican industries are now exploring ways to reroute components through Canadian facilities under the USMCA agreement, sidestepping direct US duties. Why Canada? Because it offers a familiar regulatory environment, open logistics channels, and access to global markets, without the drama. By partnering with Canada, Mexico isn't abandoning North America. It's just hedging its bets. For the Philippines, this emerging Canada-Mexico trade corridor could open new doors in manufacturing and electronics. And for Indian exporters, Canada might become the new preferred entry point into North American markets, replacing what the US once offered. Is Mexico quietly pivoting to a Canada-first strategy to protect its supply chains? If so, it could permanently shift the balance of trade in North America. Number 2. Brazil. As South America's largest economy, Brazil is no stranger to trade pressure. But Trump's 2025 tariffs, especially the staggering 50% duty on steel and copper, have hit a nerve. The Brazilian government quickly demanded negotiations, while President Lula publicly declared that South America must diversify and expand trade through a Mercosur-Canada agreement. Canada responded. Its trade minister confirmed new talks with Mercosur, the South American bloc that includes Brazil, Argentina, Paraguay, and Uruguay. Brazil, already frustrated with a trade deficit of over $410 billion with the US across 15 years, is now looking north to Canada for a fairer deal. Canada's negotiating experience with large blocs like the European Union and the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, CPTPP, makes it an appealing partner. Brazil wants not just access to Canadian consumers, but also a route into broader North American markets through Canada's existing trade architecture. For the Philippines, this potential Mercosur-Canada alignment could open up supply chain collaborations in agriculture, energy, and raw materials. For India, it's a signal that emerging markets are building their own alternatives to US dependence, and it might be time to follow suit. Is Brazil truly running toward a Canada-first trade model? If this partnership matures, it could redraw the trade map of the Americas. Number 3. United Kingdom. The United Kingdom has found itself in the middle of a global trade reset. No longer part of the European Union and now watching the US impose sweeping tariffs, Britain is moving fast to deepen its ties with Canada. In mid-2025, Prime Ministers Keir Starmer and Mark Carney formed a new UK-Canada Economic and Trade working group aimed at boosting collaboration in digital trade, artificial intelligence, infrastructure, and critical minerals. The UK is also depending on Canada to speed up its full integration into the CPTPP trade bloc, giving British companies access to over 500 million consumers across Asia and the Americas. As US tariffs hit Canada's steel and aluminum industries, Britain sees an opportunity to diversify alongside its Commonwealth partner. Why Canada? Because it represents predictability, access, and shared legal and economic frameworks. British companies are using Canadian ports and logistics networks to reach both North American and Asian markets, essentially bypassing US uncertainty. This pivot benefits the Philippines by opening up triangular trade routes. Canadian-British joint ventures could increase demand for Filipino labor, agricultural exports, or electronics. For India, the message is clear. If the UK and Canada can work as a Pacific-facing unit, Indian exporters must engage with both or risk losing access to key corridors. Is the UK quietly setting up a new trade triangle with Canada at its core? It may be the most pragmatic move post-Brexit and post-tariff chaos. Number 4. Germany and the EU. When Trump floated a 30% tariff on European Union cars in early 2025, alarm bells rang across Berlin, Brussels, and Paris. German car makers, BMW, Volkswagen, Mercedes, warned of severe disruptions. In response, the European Union began fast-tracking trade and security talks with Canada. These efforts culminated in a major EU-Canada summit, where leaders declared a new era of strategic cooperation. Germany, as the EU's industrial heart, sees Canada not just as a trade ally, but as a bridge to both North American and Indo-Pacific markets. The Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, CETA, between Canada and the EU has already boosted bilateral trade by 65% since 2017. In a world of rising protectionism, CETA is now Europe's insurance policy. Why Canada? Because it offers a tariff-free, politically stable gateway into the Americas. And unlike the US, Canada supports multilateral institutions and predictable trade norms, something Europe desperately wants in an uncertain geopolitical climate. The Philippines stands to gain through Canadian-EU investments in Asia, especially if European firms use the Philippines as a staging ground for Indo-Pacific ventures. For India, this realignment may be a cue to intensify trade with both Canada and the EU, possibly leveraging ongoing bilateral talks and creating new regional opportunities. Is the European Union turning its economic gaze away from Washington and finding a steadier partner in Canada? Number 5. France. France has always been a vocal advocate of rules-based trade. But in 2025, when President Macron's administration implemented a digital services tax targeting tech giants, the US responded aggressively. Trump's government retaliated with tariffs on French exports, wine, aircraft parts, and luxury goods, citing protection of US interests. But instead of backing down, France turned to a familiar ally, Canada. Paris and Ottawa have long shared a close commercial relationship, from Airbus collaborations to green energy initiatives. In recent months, both countries have publicly pushed back against unilateral tariffs at the World Trade Organization. France now views Canada as a safer channel for its exports, particularly through the CETA agreement, which already guarantees reduced tariffs and aligned standards. Why Canada? Because France sees it as a like-minded economy, one that upholds multilateralism, invests in clean tech, and doesn't weaponize trade policy. French exporters are leveraging Canadian distribution centers and logistics routes to reach North America without relying directly on US markets. The Philippines could benefit from Franco-Canadian projects in Southeast Asia, particularly in infrastructure, urban planning, and education tech. For India, France's pivot signals an opportunity. If European partners are realigning with Canada, Indian industries might find it easier to enter those markets via Canadian intermediaries. Is France building a quiet but powerful trade buffer with Canada? If so, it might become a blueprint for nations facing US tariff headwinds. Number 6. ASEAN nations. Canada is not just looking west, it's making serious moves eastward. In 2025, Canada's Foreign Minister Anita Anand met ASEAN leaders in Kuala Lumpur and announced fast-track negotiations for a Canada-ASEAN free trade agreement. She called ASEAN the engine of the global economy's future and committed Ottawa to deeper economic integration with the region. Trade delegations have already visited the Philippines, Vietnam, and Malaysia, offering partnerships in education, mining, technology, and manufacturing. As U.S. tariffs create unpredictability, Canada sees ASEAN as a stable, rapidly growing region that's hungry for diversified trade ties, and ASEAN nations are responding positively. Why Canada? Because it presents itself as a non-threatening, highly reliable partner. Its participation in the CPTPP adds further weight, since many ASEAN members, like Vietnam and Malaysia, are already part of that Pacific Pact. A Canada-ASEAN FTA could unlock market access to 1.5 billion consumers on both ends. For the Philippines, the benefits are immediate. Lower tariffs, expanded access to Canadian universities and employers, and increased Canadian investments in Philippine infrastructure could become a reality. For India, this Canada-ASEAN courtship is a competitive signal. If Canada cements ties with ASEAN, India may be prompted to move faster in forming its own bilateral deal with Canada or exploring CPTPP membership more seriously. Is Southeast Asia quietly embracing Canada as its next big trade partner? The answer could define the Indo-Pacific's trade future for the next decade. Number 7. Japan. Japan has long been a loyal U.S. partner, but even Tokyo is beginning to explore alternatives. Facing a 25% tariff on auto exports imposed by the U.S. in early 2025, Japanese policymakers began calling for a renewed focus on multilateral trade. Opposition leaders even suggested expanding ties with rule-respecting countries like Canada and the European Union to maintain trade resilience. In July, Canadian Foreign Minister Anita Anand visited Tokyo and announced efforts to deepen strategic cooperation across energy, tech, and Pacific security. Both countries are founding members of the CPTPP and share a deep commitment to predictable, rules-based trade. The Japan-Canada alliance is growing quietly but steadily, offering each country a shield from future trade disruptions. Why Canada? Japan sees it as a Pacific anchor, geopolitically stable, economically transparent, and legally reliable. Together, they're shaping the Pacific trade system on their own terms. For the Philippines, this alignment boosts its CPTPP ambitions. As Japan and Canada grow closer, the Philippines could find its path into the bloc smoother. Trade routes for electronics, seafood, and business services might expand quickly. For India, the Japan-Canada partnership is a clear signal. The future of Indo-Pacific trade won't just revolve around China or the US. It will be shaped by cooperative democracies building trusted supply chains. Is Japan hedging its bets by forming a quiet economic pact with Canada? The balance of power in the Pacific may already be shifting. As the world watches the United States turn inward with tariffs, the quiet rise of Canada as a global trade hub cannot be ignored. These 7 countries, Mexico, Brazil, the United Kingdom, Germany, France, Japan, and the ASEAN bloc, aren't abandoning trade. They're simply diversifying it. And Canada, with its steady hand and multilateral mindset, is the natural partner. This shift doesn't mean America is being replaced, but it does suggest that Washington's trade actions have consequences. And in that space, Ottawa is building bridges, quietly, strategically, and globally. For Filipino workers and exporters, these new alliances could offer expanded opportunities in electronics, agriculture, and education. For Indian businesses, the Canada First pivot among so many global players is a wake-up call. Engage now or risk being left behind in the new trade architecture. So, what do you think? Is Canada becoming the quiet giant of global trade? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. If you found this deep dive informative, hit like, share it with fellow explorers. and subscribe to the Discovery Trail for more geopolitics that matter to your world.